Today we are going to juxtapose the disciplines of psychoanalysis and that of cultivation. But to say to juxtapose, needs to be mentioned that there is really anything to be juxtaposed. The methods are distinct and at the same time complementary. However, if one is a cultivator, they should not be practiced to the same extent together, and we'll look at why. Yeah. If one practices psychoanalysis exclusively, one should practice that. If one practices cultivation, whatever modalities, meditation or qigong or yoga, one should practice that. However, nothing is wrong with looking at how the other practice is done and perhaps taking on board certain insights, certain methods which can be useful. It is necessary to understand that one cannot take on board the entire of the other practice. It's a massive practice. Psychoanalysis is a massive practice. Cultivation is a lifetimes long endeavor. If one thinks that one can combine both, well, maybe there is a little bit of overestimation of one's capacities going on. At the same time, if one adheres to something, one or another, like I said, there is nothing wrong with looking at the methods of the other discipline and being informed by them, really. So, to best understand how to apply psychoanalysis for somebody who is a cultivator, and this video is primarily addressed for those who practice cultivation and does not know much about psychoanalysis, as well as this entire series of lectures. We want to look at how psychoanalysis came about. Because actually it is owing to psychoanalysis that modern psychotherapy has come about. And a lot of actually modern psychotherapists and psychologists like to deny this fact. It's like they want to not pay the homage to the father founder, Freud, which is perhaps the hallmark of something else, which Freud as well as Lacan would call disavowing of the name of the father. And that signifies a particular subjective structure, which is quite predominant these days, actually. So let's look at the history of psychoanalysis, lack of a better term. Not the history of dates and names and whatever. The history of the method, how the method came about. And actually, method came about not originally through Freud. It came about through Breuer, Dr. Breuer, and his hysteric patient, famously known as Anna O in psychoanalytic literature, but her real name was Berta Pappenheim. And they worked together, really. So this Dr. Breuer was a physician, not psychotherapist or anything, because there wasn't such a thing back in the 19th century, not really, who was presented with this patient. Let's call her Anna O, keep it in alignment with psychoanalytic formulation, who presented a lot of physical symptoms, such as visual disturbances, paralysis, various bodily phenomena that occurred to her, which could not really be explained or treated with methods of ordinary general medicine. So what they did, Dr. Breuer, as actually many physicians those days, was skilled in hypnosis. So he put Anna O under hypnosis, hypnotized her, and discovered that in that state she mumbles certain words. Not only in this state, but also in the states of her ordinary absences. That would be the states of her dissociation from being present. she would mumble those certain words, and what he would do under hypnosis, he would repeat those words back to her many times and encourage her, while she was hypnotized, to uncover the associative links which has to do with those words. And gradually she started doing that. She would recount various fancies, stories, memorabilia, which would be deeply sad or poetic or beautiful or daydream-like. And after having done so, have invented certain emotion that has been withheld by these signifiers. That's what Lacan would call them eventually afterwards. She would be returned to her ordinary state of psychic functioning. She would no longer be absent, no longer dissociated. That would last for several hours. Then she would fall back into absences, but then next time Breuer came along, they would repeat the treatment. So gradually her state improved, and that cathartic cure, as Breuer called it, worked. And Anna O famously christened this method as a talking cure. What they discovered is that the symptoms, physical symptoms, the conversion symptoms, as they are called within psychoanalytic jargon, predominant within hysteria, can be removed via breaking the associative connections and affectivity which was withheld by those connections with memories, of course, as the events of the past. And a few of those symptoms have been revoked like that. For example, Anna O could not drink water. She would bring the glass to her lips and just get stuck there and would put it away. As a result, she would be eating a lot of fruit during the hot summer times, just to get some fluid into her. So under hypnosis, she recounted that at some point she saw her governess's little dog, and she despised her governess as well as her dog. And so she saw the dog drinking from a glass, drinking water. After that, she could no longer drink water. Having recollected that incident, immediately after the session, coming out of hypnosis, she asked for a glass of water and drank it. Another instance, she had visual disturbances. Her vision would play up on her, basically. Could not see clearly, so blurry, etc. Again, under hypnosis, she recounted that when she was sitting by the bedside of her father, and that's what she was doing prior to arising of all those symptoms, she would be taking care of her dying father. He was very sick and eventually passed away. So once she was sitting by the bedside and was overcome by intense sadness, really. Tried to look at her wristwatch, but could not, because she was trying to suppress the tears coming up, because she didn't want her father to see those tears. And she tried to look at them and could not. After that, her vision went. After the session, these disturbances have stopped. She could see clearly again. So this is the example of conversion-based physical symptoms, not based on any other physical thing like glaucoma or cataracts or astigmatism or anything like that. Just purely through a psychic cause. Another symptom that she had was a paralysis of her right arm. Again, under hypnosis, through this method of recounting, sort of recollecting the events around the time, she remembered that once she was resting in the armchair and her arm was hanging over the back of the chair, like so, like this. Obviously, circulation gets cut a little bit when you have something pressing on the arteries here, with your arm hanging like this. And in some kind of a daydream state, in a sort of a reverie, she saw black snake approaching her father's bedside. And at that stage, she tried to shoo it away. Obviously, it was a hallucination. But she tries to shoo it away and could not. She was froze. She was paralyzed. She tried to say something, but she could not. And in the state, the only language that came out to her mind was English. After that, she could only speak English and forgot her actual, the other tongue language, which would be what, German, living in Switzerland. So the treatments were undertaken in English first. After the recollection of this memory, both paralysis were gone and language was back as well, the other language, German. So that kind of illustrates how the affects, which have been dissociated from the signifiers, which were repressed, in this case would be what, like snake or a dog with a glass of water or whatever else there. Wristwatch could be reintegrated. The characteristic hysteric neurotic mechanism of suppression, which is basically amnesia, overcome and affect reintegrated, thereby leading to dissolution of symptom. Needless to say that the Anna O has not been fully treated by this method. At least at that stage, when her paralysis stopped, the treatments disappeared, vanished. However, another interesting incident then took place. At some stage, Dr. Breuer was called home and told that his patient was going through a childbirth. Obviously, she wasn't pregnant physically, but she was going through a full-fledged symptoms of a childbirth. That's a hysterical childbirth, producing the symptoms on the inside. Abdominal swelling, pains, spasms, everything. So that was her way to overcome the separation from the doctor she formed such an attachment with. Yeah? It's as if she became pregnant with that relationship that led to a birth of a talking cue. And obviously her and Breuer's child for the world was this talking cue. She was a patient of Freud later on and returning again, which led to Freud's deepening of the studies on hysteria, but that's another topic, a very deep one. We look at the hysteria in the lectures through Lacanian lens as well to see what actually is at stake with this structure. Definitely that first case was not fully resolved by the founding fathers of psychoanalysis. So anyhow, Freud, when knew of his work, of Breuer's work, they both together continued this practice. And Freud was also referred, the patients were also referred to Freud whose symptoms could not be treated in any medical way. A lot of them were women, and a lot of them had hysteric structure, as it will be established later, not at that time. And he applied that method, which then led to furthering of the research. So preliminary, what did Freud conclude? That people who have neurosis suffer from attachment and entanglement with the past. Certain phenomena in the past cause the suppression of affect stemming from a traumatic experience. And more often than not, this is what Freud discovered, such traumatic experience could be found in encounters with the drive or the impressions from the sexual life, certain impulse components of the erotic sphere were at stake. As Lacan would call it later, these are encounters with the real. Yeah? And the real pertaining to the drive and sexuality is particularly thwarting and disturbing for a continuum of functioning of the ego. Yeah? And the ego suppresses it. Hence, the unconscious is created. But we'll talk about this in more detail when we look at the relevant subject. The real, which has to do with impossible and unsymbolizable, which in the case of Anna O was the encounter with that hallucination of the black snake by her father's bedside, rendering her paralyzed, is by nature traumatic. Yeah? The drive, sexuality for the ego is by very nature traumatic. So that's what has been discovered. What we can add from the perspective of cultivation is that the moments of such an encounter are also accompanied by certain loss of presence, isn't it? One no longer is mindful of the body, of the position of the body in space. One is overtaken by a certain psychic process, the impression that is taking place, which completely absorbs them. Like in the event of Anna O's being paralyzed or being repulsed by dogs drinking from a glass, there is incidence of not being present as such. Yeah. Mental formation, perception of a kind overtakes one, leading to the loss of sati, loss of mindfulness. Of course, psychoanalysts in the 19th century did not operate under these conceptual frameworks, which are cultivational frameworks, Buddhist frameworks, as such. But we can recount it now. Phenomena, when they are traumatic, not seen for what they are. Real is only traumatic when it is not seen for what it is. Yeah. When the perception, when the feeling do overtake one without allowing one to experience that feeling or that emotion in the body. So the body, the materiality of the body, the suffering of the body are denied, they are pushed away by a certain mental process. When we look again into structuration of subjectivity or the formation of the ego, we'll see that the ego as a structure, as a formation, solely aims at pushing away the real of the body, the real of the drive, to veiling this dukkha pertaining to the body and the drive and the reality as such. But that's later. So further on, Freud later on in his development abandons hypnosis as he discovers that it's not possible to hypnotize everyone, only certain people are prone for that. And most importantly is that being under hypnosis conceals the resistances to the repression. So in normal waking life, say Anna O would not be able to recollect these repressed memories because resistances are too strong. One cannot penetrate through them. But there is a virtue in working with the resistances, because when resistances are completely discounted, they come back again, yeah? Repressed returns, and it's the same as the repression. Freud found that there is a virtue to work through the resistances with the method which he developed later. There has been a work happening at that same time by Charcot in France, whom Freud went and studied with as well, with hysterics, and his student Janet. But they were on the side of organicism. They were looking for the causes of these psychic disturbances and bodily, mental disturbances in the nervous system. Yeah, like Janet would theorize that the certain congenital lack of capacity on the part of mental apparatus to synthesize its experiences causes the psychic disturbance, causes hysteria. Freud was not agreeing with that. He was not convinced with that. He was not basing his research in laboratory setting as sort of Charcot and Janet were. They were in an institutionalized setting. Freud had his patients in his consulting room, yeah, and he was trying to help them as best he could, not trying to use them as the laboratory rats to understand what's going on. So his theory stems from that, from the praxis of helping people to deal with their psychic suffering. So Freud established the theory of resistances and the repression. Resistances to and repression of the traumatic experiences of encountering with the real. Of course, he didn't call it the real at that time. That's Lacan's development. So he urges his patients, already without hypnosis, to remember that which they knew not of. They would say to him, I cannot remember it, not in any way. But he would tell him, yes, you can. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes just his urge, yes, you can remember it, would work. Sometimes it wouldn't. So he developed the method further. And that development is the old famous freely associative method, free associations, which consisted of allowing a patient to speak along any desired lines, anything they wanted to speak about. Yeah. Then they're told not to pass any critical judgment, not to filter that which is being said. Then they're told that anything is unessential, irrelevant, nonsensical even, or unpleasant is to be said. And that was the method in speech. That was the main part of the method. That's the bread and butter of psychoanalytic praxis. Next bit, according to Freud, just as important is interpretation of dreams. And it's not some kind of future-telling magical stuff, archetype, recovering symbolism, interpretation, nothing like that. I think dream interpretation in the context of psychoanalysis is generally the most misunderstood part by the general public. So one does not give a damn about really abstracted, manifest forms of the dream content, because often they're nonsense or something completely meaningful. The contrary of that. That's irrelevant from psychoanalytic point of view. What's relevant is each dream element, which can be discerned to be brought in the free associative flow by a person. So these are eruptive ideas which arise therefrom, from freely associating certain dream elements, lead to distilling of the latent dream ideas. And latent dream ideas, in terms of Freud, always and unequivocally are the way for the psychic apparatus to fulfill the wish which was not fulfilled on the previous day, before one slept and saw the dream. Yeah. So we have these latent dream thoughts, which thereby are distracted from the manifest dream content and really associated. Of course, the argument to that is the nightmares. Not all dreams are really wish-fulfilling dreams, but the nightmares have a different function. They have a function of venting off of the anxiety, which comes from ego approaching to realizing these suppressed wishes too close to realizing the suppressed wishes, too close to fulfillment. And that, by very definition of the real, according to Lacan, is anxiety-provoking. For what is real, what is anxiety, if not the real? Yeah. Third part of the method is the evaluation of the bungled actions or unintended actions, which include forgetting certain things that one would know at other times, bungled actions on the part of the mind, mistakes in speaking, slips of the tongue, garbled speech when one kind of like mumbles something out, which kind of bypasses one's conscious filtering. Then we have mistakes in reading and writing. We have automatic acts in the inappropriate situations, or inappropriate acts in appropriate situations. Loss or breaking of objects, playing and trifling, mucking around with objects, humming melodies, handling oneself or one's clothing, stuff like that. Actions which are arbitrary, sort of irrelevant. So then those actions are as well analyzed, brought into free associative flow of speech. Again, the main method is through speech. Dreams and actions are kind of stepping stones to push away from into the propelling the process of free association. And free association leads, via the analyst's probing, directing, and interpretation, to distilling or recovering of those elements of the drives otherwise suppressed. When those are recovered, and in order to reintegrate the affect or the wish, which, like I said before, more often than not has to do with the sexual life, the various elements of erotic life, they are integrated in a variety of ways. So according to Freud, some of them are accepted, fully or partially. That's the first thing. Because sexuality is just that. It's a normal part of one's life, but through various, injunctions of moral, ethical, religious, and Freud was very much ready to kick in the nuts of the established religious paradigm of the time, at any time. Prohibitions would stay in the way of realizing those pretty natural human impulses. So that's that, as a whole or partial integration. Next, or the second one, is sublimation. The energy of the wish or the drive is sublimated and directed towards some higher goal. Whether it is within one's work, or within art, or within one's spiritual practice, regardless. And that would actually be the correct way to undergo spiritual practice, not via just rejecting and suppressing fully one's libido, but via sublimating it and directing it to one's practice, one's path. The third part would be recognizing that the given wish is rightly so repressed, and thereby cutting it on the spot. Because one would be fool to deny that certain human wishes can be unacceptable or are unacceptable. What are they? Murderous intents on robbing someone of their property, wishes leading to death, wishes leading to harming oneself or others, stealing, lying, cheating on others, basically wishes which would lead to harm. Those need to be repressed, and they are rightly so repressed. Now there is a lot of talk on integrating one's shadow, or stepping into one's dark side, as if there is some kind of power or worth or gain that can be had from that, from taking ownership of one's unwholesome cravings, of one's unwholesome intentions and desires. From the standpoint of the founder of psychoanalysis and from the standpoint of every major world religion, certain impulses and aspects are just to be cut off on the spot, to be abandoned. Hence we have commandments, we have precepts, we have human laws which prohibit killing, stealing, misconduct, etc. Why is there so much talk about integrating these unwholesome elements of the drives these days? I don't know. Again, maybe testifies for the perversion of the culture. So definitely Freud's method has been developing from that, and a lot of theory has been created by Freud, and that has laid foundation for the work of later psychoanalysts such as Jacques Lacan, whose praxis and the theoretical developments I am looking in particular in this course of lectures. In a nutshell, Lacan brought the following innovations to the methods. The most drastic of those was cutting of the sessions. His variable length analysis was the cause of him being expelled from the psychoanalytic association, but then he started his own. He would basically cut the standard 40 minutes or hour, whatever it was, with the Freudian analysis to 5 minutes or 10 minutes. If the analysand, the patient, would stall, or if they would produce just narrative which was beside the point, beside the topic, which was just beaten against the bush, around the bush, sorry. And at the moments when certain significant element of the unconscious narrative would emerge, that would be the moment to cut the session as well for Lacan. And that proven to be productive method, proven to be useful at emphasizing those certain elements of the unconscious that need to be uncovered. Another innovation is the scansion or the punctuation of the discourse of the analysand. The analyst would repeat the words of analysand back to them, or question them on that particular element they just recounted through their freely associative process, or they would just pause with silence. Yeah. Another major theoretic innovation of Lacan's was the distillment of the so-called analyst's desire, the desire of the analyst, which came about through the practice, through the personal analysis, and we will speak about it more. And basically it entails one continuously maintaining the wish, the wholesome desire for the other to continue the process of analysis, to continue to freely associate, to reveal, recount the aspects, the formations of the unconscious. Whereas the desire of the analysand may stall and be inhibited, analyst's desire must always be there, must always continue, which is not indifferent from the wholesome desire or chanda, which we talk about within the cultivational context, particularly within Buddhism, the desire to continue the practice, the path. Without this desire, how can one practice? Yeah. So the traversing of fantasy was another major Lacanian theoretic innovation, which we'll talk about in detail. It's a big subject. And to my view, the most beneficial Lacanian contribution is the formulation of subjective structures. The structures of subjectivity, such as neurotic, psychotic, perverted, autistic. They are particular distinct modes of functioning. They are mathematical representations, etc. Is major. This is where Lacan took the Freud's method and brought it to a new height. Of course, then Lacanian method stalled as well with just proliferation of the mind. One cannot deny that a lot of Lacanian texts are cryptic, enigmatic, ovaries, which are, well, of course, Lacan intended to write in such a way because he was against formulating something into a rigid system or theory, because that would amount to reification. But within the psychic life, there can be no reification. Everything is a flux, everything is a fluid. Lacan is well known for saying that sometimes he would think with his feet, because that's the only place he would find anything solid, which gives one kind of a good impression of how psychic life is and how subjectivity or the ego, that which one perceives as self, is. It's a flux. As soon as one starts working with it in this way, dismantling it, disassembling it, it reveals its ephemerity, its insubstantiality. The self is not there, actually. And again, that's the main tenet of Buddhism, isn't it? Anatta, that there isn't any self. There is no subject. So later, following Freud and Lacan, modern contemporary psychoanalysts continue on developing the methods, and originally psychoanalysis was developed as the method of working with the neurosis and with the neurotic subjects, and that's what it's best known of, best efficient for. But even Freud already in his time, and Lacan in particular, because he started working with psychotic people, found that this technique is not applicable to psychotic people. That's and we'll look into the reasons as to why, because there is no unconscious within psychosis. Neither there is unconscious in the autism. But later psychoanalysts, as I said, have developed methods and techniques, or having what's the word? Having adapted the methods of Freudian analysis to the psychotic and autistic people. So there are psychoanalytic methods of work with those subjects as well. Once again, when we look in detail on each subjective structure, we'll see as to what these methods are and what do they entail. So this, in a nutshell, the beginning, the technique of psychoanalysis consisting in free association, interpretation of dreams, and analysis of various unconscious actions. Yeah. To recount that this is a method, and hence all the theory born of it is a praxis-based theory and not a philosophy. Yeah. Every statement of psychoanalysts comes from the clinical practice. All the tenets are born from there. In Freud, it applies to dealing with symptoms of psychic suffering. In Lacan, it goes further and has a potential for understanding the entire structuration of subjectivity, subjectification of the drive at the cause of one's symptoms, and subverting of fundamental fantasy, abandoning the illusion which compels one to repeat things in life, or repeat life. Well, it doesn't really go that far. For that one needs cultivation. So how is it compatible with cultivation? Well, first of all, it works to reintegrate the affect. And that, as we know, the major cause of blockages, disturbances of the body, interruptions in the flow of qi in people. And that it's profoundly disruptive for persons on the individual basis and for cultivators, because it prevents one to further develop qualities of mind, qi, and consciousness that lead to further realizations. So the effects need to be worked with. And what I mean by effects are exactly the quota of energy which has become separated from the signifier, and the signifier that has been repressed, made unknown to conscious flow of the ego mind. That needs to be reintegrated. The signifier is to brought into light, into analysis, the effect reinstated. Yeah. So that the energy is no longer latently withheld and blocking the flow of qi through the body, but is reinvested in the process. We want more qi for cultivation, that's obviously, and we can't afford qi which has been withheld by repressed memories to be there. Yeah. So, second major benefit is that it's the way to exercise discernment in regards to the psychic causality. Yeah. And I don't see it as neither in Buddhist nor in Daoist modalities as much, this particular way of discernment which psychoanalytic theory has developed. thanks to theory of sexuality, thanks for the understanding of repression, understanding of how fundamental fantasy in Lacan functions. None of the cultivational modalities, even the standard sort of profound ways of understanding the mind, work with that area. And I think it's a shame, because I see a lot of people, even within the cultivational circles, who are struggling with their neurosis, basically, and the roots of it are based in the sexuality, in affectivity, in the function of their fantasy, in the way their obsession or their hysteria manifests is there. It's not within how well they practice, how well their method works, and it's within the repressed. Thanks to this discernment in regards to function of the psyche, we can disclose the subliminal motivations which compel us to do things. And again, if we cut them off, we spare ourselves being involved in the senseless repetition. Another aspect is that psychoanalytic praxis allows one to work with the drive. The drive thereby can be reintegrated or abandoned when it's contingent and unwholesome. Yeah, one who cultivates knows that the abandonment of the unwholesome and cultivation of the wholesome is a major part of the practice. So for someone who practices psychoanalysis, it is the acquisition of knowledge of how the unconscious works that constitutes the fruition of the analysis. Having seen this functioning, plus having studied the psychoanalytic theory, one no longer is subjected to unknown forces which urge one as if from the inside. One is no longer a puppet, no longer a puppet to the other, as we'll explore later on in other lectures as to what the other is, etc. So that's definitely is beneficial, is wholesome. However, like I said in the beginning, one does not have to go at length and practice full-fledged psychoanalysis, having 2-3 sessions with the psychoanalyst each week, etc., and start going full on into this work. If one already has cultivational practice established, that would simply be excessive, unnecessary effort. What one needs, if one is a cultivator already, is to get familiarized with this theory. Yeah? Because what praxis does within psychoanalytic modalities allows one to access the unconscious. If one has a cultivation, one already has other ways to access the unconscious. Yeah? This is not to be confused with a very common alleged judgment of psychoanalysts directed towards the obsessive neurotics, who are known to only engage with psychoanalysis on the level of theory. Yeah, this kind of piles of the cultivators on the side of obsessive neurotics. But that's not the case. Obsessive neurotics have resistance towards the uncovering of the unconscious. And that manifests as passing judgment onto the psychoanalytic theory or onto the Freud. And that's, oh my God, I think no man in history have been so much misjudged, so much wrongly accused as Freud. Yeah, we have folks like Hitler, and yeah, they've been accused rightly so, because they did horrible shit. But that wasn't the case for Freud, and often I hear the allegations referring to Freud like monstrosities or complete fantasies, like things that Freud done which he never did, but people still recount these stories. Where did they come from? I don't know. Maybe that's the way how the repression and resistance functions in the human unconscious anyway. However, yeah, Freud has become an object of a great transference. As we know, there is a process of transference that takes place in the analytic work, whereby the The analysand inscribes certain value to analyst's words and then transfers via that value their own unprocessed, repressed wishes, their drive onto the analyst, ascribing them to the analyst, thereby transferring their crap onto the analyst. For which analysts are continuous subjects. That's inevitable. That's going to happen in the practice. Of course, there are ways of dealing with that. Not responding to counter-transference, not acting upon counter-transference is the way to deal with it in the Lacanian context. But yeah, Freud has become a subject of great transference, whereby a ton load of people, without even having read his works, but only knowing of Freud in a populist sense, criticize him, judge him, whatever, ascribe things he never done to him. That's obsessive neurotic method of dealing with the repression or fashioning the resistances, or actually fashioning the ignorance. Because how can you criticize or judge someone without studying their work in depth? I think that's morality. The opposite to that is the attitude of the hysteric, which would gladly jump into analysis and start fulfilling all the requirements of analysis only too well. Hysterics are perfect candidates for analysis, but what happens later, they again bring it all back to the analyst and castrate the analyst as the not good enough of a master, who has not brought that thing which hysteric was looking for to them. But that we'll touch on in a greater detail when we look at the hysteric structure. So, cultivator is neither, isn't it? Because of the means of the methods which cultivational practitioners have, whether they are through chi, whether they are through prana, whether they are through asana, or through work with the mind, in case of mind-based systems like Buddhist systems, meditation-based systems, or chi-based systems such as qigong, various fires-based systems like yoga, or if one practices traditional trance methods, they would do virtually the same. They would allow one to access the inner mechanisms, inner energies which underlie one's subliminal motivations. That would be equivalent to accessing the unconscious within the psychoanalytic paradigm. Because cultivators have those methods, they don't have to engage with psychoanalysis full on. For cultivators, it is enough to pay attention to things like slips of the tongue, garbled actions. I just done a few slips of the tongue myself. Why is it so? I probably have to pay attention to that later on. Repetitive behaviors which are unwholesome, yeah, and apply those three early Freudian ways: either uncovering and integrating the drive, if it's wholesome, sublimating it and directing it towards one's higher goals of the practice, or completely cutting it off on the spot as unwholesome and having nothing to do with it. Why? Because certain impulses are to be repressed. Yeah? Not everything that is repressed is wrong. It is rightful to repress that which is harmful to oneself or others. In terms of the phenomena which arise in the psyche, there is really not as much to them. In early Freudian conception, every phenomenon has meaning, every phenomenon has a causality. Because, well, it was a sort of early days of discovery of this theory, of this praxis. But if you look at it in the cultivational perspective, it's like, I like the phrase which Gian Sumedo uttered. Basically, and that's the phrase, all your thoughts are garbage. When I said this phrase to one of my friends who is a psychologist, he was startled. Well, anyway, we discussed what I meant after. This is it for a cultivator. Whatever comes to your mind is just a mental burp or mental fart, either. And to be treated as that, it's the phenomena taking place, yeah. Within the cultivational system, we discern, of course, between phenomena which are relevant as a markers in the process and which are irrelevant. Ultimately, all phenomena are irrelevant, and that's what Buddhist statement, there is no dharma, which is worthy of attachment, is about. Yeah. So we see all these phenomena within the psyche or the mind as mental formations, as the manifestations of the activity of the mind, and the mind more often than not, that is in a state of imbalance, in a state of fragmentation. Obviously, state of fragmentation is the condition which everyone is born into, but we'll talk about it later when we discuss the drive and the ego. But here I'm talking about the fragmentation of components of the mind which are refracted from the unified mind, the Yuan Shan, if you like, into the separate 5 Shan, 5 spirits, if you follow the Daoist model. Basically, interplay and disorganized functioning of these 5 spirits is what produces the content, the flow of mental formation, the psychic phenomena. It is precisely that kind of flow, that kind of discourse, when it just outpours, is what Lacan would just cut in the session, because he wouldn't just sit there and listen to the nonsense, which is irrelevant. But he will still take the payment for the full session. And that's why he was kicked out of the Psychoanalytic Association. Nevertheless, it's still practiced, and people would still pay for the session that's being cut, seeing significance in that. For someone who practices cultivation, once one has access to that which determines mental formations, the access to, if it's a Qigong, the access to Qi, yeah, which is the interface between the body and the mind. Well, one can govern Qi, isn't it? One can learn how to redirect Qi from feeding the production of mental formation and redirecting it to something else, to maybe, I don't know, nourish organs, tissues, create fields, or to be stored as pure electrical potential within the body, yeah, without feeding the mind, and then directing it skillfully to such things as absorption of the awareness, jhana, or to deep contemplation of the nature of reality, such as per vipassana, and further development of the path. Mm-hmm. So to finish off, I would like to stress again the importance of that particular knowledge which pertains to psychoanalytic experience, the structured knowledge in regards to the functioning of subjectivity, which, like I said, even detailed Buddhist and Daoist models don't have access to, not really. It is particular this part of the subject formation which has to do with dependence on or antagonism towards the other. Yeah? Because we are the other. We are nothing more, not really, than the copy-paste of those influential others which we were brought up around, and the big other of language and culture which we were brought up within. The way it happens, the way it forms us, needs to be studied. It needs to be understood. Because if it's not, well, we are governed by it. We are led by the desires and demands which are not ours, which have been imposed on us. And that, as many cultivators in the past have discovered, is a major hurdle. Because we want to disentangle ourselves from investing into the dream of the other, investing into fantasies of the other, which, if we are unconscious, govern us. Mm-hmm. As we will look through, within the context of these lectures, it is this mechanism whereby, in response to the pressure of the drive and encounter with infantile sexuality, then acquisition of language and culture, avoidance, which all are the forms of avoidance of the real pertaining to suffering of this body, pertaining to trying to separate oneself from the experience of this body and the energy directly, which are far from being pleasant, at the outset. That human beings are born and born and born again into that which not psychoanalytic theory, cultivational theories, particular Buddhism, define as samsara, isn't it? Understanding of the mechanism of dependence is crucial to understanding of the mechanism of unbinding. Not understanding this mechanism amounts to just repetition of that which the others before us have repeated ad nauseum for millennia. That is the upbringing, acquisition of the other's knowledge, becoming in accordance with this knowledge, which eventually would bring about some kind of self based on this knowledge. Then this self which has been formed ought to decay, disintegrate and die, which would be followed by rebirth and repetition of that same circle. And that's the rotation of the wheel of dependent origination, isn't it? So in my view, and this is where psychoanalytic theory most applicable to cultivation, is that it allows us to understand that particular aspect of the process of becoming, which is responsible for making us other dependent, making us dependent on the desire, demand, and knowledge of the other, preventing us from being independent in following our aspirations for whatever they may be, transcendence, perhaps. Thank you for listening.